Remember, you need to make sure you're taking notes on all of this. When you're finished with the notes, we'll open up GoFormative so you can do some practice. Just kind of a side note, the symbol for parallel lines is like a picture of parallel lines, and perpendicular is kind of like an upside down T. Alright, so first of all, parallel lines. Parallel lines are two lines that never cross. Lines go on forever and ever, but these will never cross. So an example, and I have one line drawn right here. An example of parallel lines, this example right here, it has a y-intercept of 3 and a slope of 1 over 2. So this has a slope of 1/2 and a y-intercept of 3. A parallel line could be anywhere on this graph, like anywhere up and down the y. I could draw it down here, crossing at -3. But in order for it to never cross, it would have to go on forever and ever in the same slope as the blue line you see here. So for this red line below, if you look, it has 1 over 2, 1 over 2. It still has a slope of 1 over 2. So the takeaway for this part is that parallel lines, they never cross, and they have the same slope. Okay? Now, perpendicular lines are two lines that do cross. But now when these two lines cross, and here's an example here, I have one line drawn, a perpendicular line, this line for instance, right here again, it has a y-intercept of 2 and once again a slope of 1/2, so I'm just going to write that right here. Now a perpendicular line, I have one started here. Oops. Perpendicular lines cross to form right angles, okay, 90-degree angles. So they're perfect crossing, kind of like the crossway at a stoplight. Those are perpendicular. The bricks on the wall in here, those form perpendicular lines. They're perfectly cross each other 90 degrees. So we know this slope is 1/2. The slope of this line over here, if we go from this point down to this one, down to this one is going up 2 and to the left 1. So the slope of this line, like I said, up 2 and to the left 1 has a slope of -2 or 2 over -1. So the more we would do this, hopefully, and you've already learned this, but you can notice that the slopes, this is 2 over 1, this is 1 over 2. So they're just flipped. This is negative, this is positive. Okay? So perpendicular lines form right angles, 4 right angles, 90 degrees. And they also, their slopes are opposite sign reciprocal. Whoops, opposite sign reciprocal. In other words, opposite sign, that's explanatory, and then you could say flipped. So let's just practice really quick. If the slope of a line is 1/2, a perpendicular slope of a line to this one would be -2 over 1. Notice I flipped it and I changed the sign. Okay? A line with a slope of 2/3, what would the perpendicular slope be? -3 over 2. Let's try one more. A slope of -3, perpendicular slope would be what? Now for this one, when you just put your answer in, but hopefully you remember that you can always have a 1 on the bottom. So I'm going to flip it, which gives me 1/3. This was negative, so this is going to be positive. Slope is 2/3. What would a parallel slope be? A line that's parallel to this one. Well, parallel lines have the same slope, so it would be 2/3. Let's do one more. If a slope is -3, what would the parallel slope be? -3 as well. Okay, so that's just getting started there, I guess. So now let's talk about some examples here. I want to know what is, I'm going to give you a point and a line. So I want to find the equation of a line that goes through the point -1, 2, and is parallel to the line y equals 3x plus 4. And I want my equation in slope-intercept form, which, a refresher, is y equals mx plus b. So one thing we know about parallel slopes, and I want a line that's parallel to this one, what's the slope of this line? The slope is 3. So we have a slope and we have a point. Now the coordinates of a point are, the first one is your x and the second one is your y. That's describing this coordinate. Well, if you look back at this equation up here, we have an m in there, which we could just put the 3 in place. We have an x, which we could just put the -1 in place, and the y, and then we're left with the b, which is the y-intercept. So let's go ahead and do that. Instead of the y, I'm going to write 2. Let me go ahead and write y equals mx plus b. So instead of the y, I'm going to put a 2. Instead of the m, I'm going to put 3. Instead of the x, I'm going to put a -1. And don't forget, the m and the x next to each other is multiplying. And I don't know what the y-intercept is. That's what we have to figure out. Here we go. Solving an equation. 3 times -1 is -3. We're trying to get b by itself. To move the -3 to the other side, I'm going to add 3. They cancel out. 2 plus 3 is 5. Our y-intercept is 5. So for this, we have y-intercept and we have a slope. The equation of the line is y equals mx plus b. We don't have an x and a y in the equation of a line. So all we're going to do is, now that we've found these two things, we're going to go ahead and plug them in. Y equals 3x, that's the slope, and the y-intercept is 5. So that's an equation of a line parallel to this one going through that one. And it makes sense. Like these two lines, if you were to graph it, this line's crossing at 4 and has a slope of 3, pretty steep. This line's crossing at 5. It too has a slope of 3. So you can see that they're parallel and they're never going to cross. All right, so that's parallel. Now let's do a perpendicular. Okay? So this time we're going to write the equation of a line that's perpendicular to y equals -2/3 x plus 4, and it goes through the point 4, -1. Alright, so same as we did above, this time it's perpendicular instead of parallel. What do we know about perpendicular slopes? If the slope of this line is -2/3, what's the slope of a perpendicular line? we flip it and we change the sign. So we've got a slope here, and we've got our x is 4 and our y is -1. So we're just going to plug those things into slope-intercept form. Instead of the, well, let's start with the y. Instead of the y, I'm going to plug in -1. Instead of the m, I'm going to plug in 3/2. Instead of the x, I'm going to plug in 4. And then I've got a b. All right, we just got to solve for the b now. Order of operations, the first thing I need to do is figure out what 3/2 times 4 is. Well, 3 times 4 is like 4/1. So 3 times 4 is 12. 2 times 1 is 2. 12/2 is 6. Plug it in your calculator if you need to. Okay, you could also say 2 goes into 4 2 times. 3 times 2 is 6. Subtract 6 from both sides. Therefore, b is equal to a -7. Alright, so we've got our y-intercept, we've got our slope. We're going to plug it into slope-intercept form to get the equation of the line that's perpendicular. So it's going to be y equals 3/2, our new slope, plus a -7 or -7. It means the same thing. Alright, there you go. Now